Greenlighting and Grace. I've entitled this. And as you all know, what we mean by greenlighting is noticing and attending to whatever's arising um, internally. It is allowing, accepting, embracing, giving permission to whatever anxious, regretful, fearful, jealous, sad, angry, resentful, or soothing, delighted, exuberant, thrilled, um, enthusiastic, ecstatic feeling that you might observe. It's really noticing and leaning into those inner feelings. Now, it might seem redundant to say inner feelings, but I do that because greenlighting is an internal process, actually, just as awakening is an internal process. And knowing your conscious nature is an interior recognition of something that is infinite and eternal. And infinite doesn't mean a really big space, and eternal doesn't mean a really long time. It's not. It's non-spatial and non-temporal. This recognition of something interior, and Kabir Helminsky has observed that sensation, bodily sensation, is the threshold between the inner and outer worlds. And since following the sensation is the central core of green lighting, its practice occurs right here in the midst of this limited, dense, contingent, three-dimensional body mind. And it's a practice that involves consistency, but that requires delicacy. And I really like the really exquisitely subtle distinction that Andrea Gibson makes when she says, don't try harder, try softer. Or we could say it like the Taoist masters say, follow the water, seek the low. They call this Wu Wei, the art of not doing. And it's a lot like that. Green lighting is an ever subtler exploration of not of non-doing. We just gently stay with whatever we are noticing, and our attention is following the lead of that subtle sensation. And that allows the contraction at its source to release, or at least to relax a bit. And we're talking about tissue level stuff here. What we're doing is gently and slowly undoing um, the vital shock of embodiment that we all incur when we come into this realm. Yeah. And greenlighting is what makes Trillium a tantric process. Now, I should say, um, contrary to a lot of popular understanding, Tantra in its original expression is not all about making a spiritual practice out of having great sex. It's an authentic spiritual lineage with a comprehensive understanding that considers matter in general and the body in particular to be essential parts of ultimate reality. It's not illusory. It's real. It's every bit as real, divine, and important as spirit, as Samuel used to say. Your body and your feelings and all the vicissitudes of your personal story are all part of your spiritual practice in this work. And one thing also that sets us a little bit apart is that, unlike most spiritual and religious traditions, we don't have a lot of lifestyle do's and don'ts here. These traditions generally have some version of the Judeo Christian Ten Commandments, which have seven don'ts and three do's. And in the same way that Jesus was a Jew, Buddha was a Hindu. And both Hinduism and Buddhism have lots of do's and don'ts. A good example might be yoga, fairly well known in the West by now. And it's a whole lot more than just bending and stretching on a mat. Actually, it's one of the six systems of Indian philosophy and is said to have eight dimensions or eight limbs. And the first two of which are called yamas and niyamas, which are, as you might expect, do's and don'ts. Um, and by contrast, Tantra asks the revolutionary question, what if there's nothing to renounce? What if awakening can happen right in the trenches of everyday life? What if all those well-intentioned lists of do's and don'ts are not essential to awakening? Uh, Down through the ages, that has been seen as a dangerous question, and it's what makes this work both rapid and sometimes troublesome. Well, often troublesome and occasionally risky. Tantra says that the best way forward is not to go over or under or around difficult feelings, but right through them. We say we consciously and intentionally embrace whatever's coming up. We try surrender. When we accept and allow, we surrender to what is in the moment. And rather than repressing or distracting, we authentically feel what's actually true, what is real. And as a result of spontaneously releasing some of the tension at the base of that sensation, some of the contraction, we move uh, more authentically and more gently through the world. Yeah. So that's some thoughts about green lighting. Now, Christine Nelson has observed when you slow down enough to absorb the nourishment of your attention, you find that this disposition also makes you better able to access the gifts of grace, awe, and beauty. So, what about grace? Well, as we cultivate surrender and continue releasing the impacts of living in a world where love has yet to take its hold, we begin to be clearer and more receptive and more resilient conduit for the wholeness that already surrounds us. And if we're becoming divinely human, maybe divine grace should be part of our experience. Now, the thing is, the word grace may have many meanings to different people, many nuances and understandings. So, I was trying to think of other words that we might be useful to us in describing this, to elucidate this concept. So, how about words like blessing, favor, enrichment, good luck, serendipity, intuitive understanding, communion, accord, benevolence. I think these are all candidates in certain ways and describe certain what we call dimensions of this thing we call grace. And I like to quote Serene Jones, who is the past provost of Union Theological Seminary in New York. She has said that grace is more original than sin. Or we might say, in our language, grace is more foundational to ultimate reality than separation or division. Um, a teacher I had many years ago said enlightenment or awakening is the simplest state of awareness. All other states, everything else is more complicated, more difficult, and takes more effort. And these ecstatic states of grace don't require effort. We don't climb in love, we fall in love. And like that, falling into grace is a surrender. And it arrives spontaneously in its own time, of its own, on its own. And when the goddess comes for you, that power sweeps aside every resistance and reluctance and uh, insufficiency. Uh, Speaking from my own experience, I could say this grace comes on unexpectedly as a kind of, I can only say, sublime and humbling exaltation that that it feels like a tender, porous, burning communion with all things. In a certain way, it's like the reticular activating system in my brain has taken a break. And all the information that flows in from all the five senses that normally gets filtered out in order to ensure my survival, that all comes flooding in. And the thing is, it's not discordant. Somehow it's all harmonious and breathtakingly beautiful. And these states of grace seem to differ between people, in my experience, depending on their particular dispositions and their life journeys. But one thing that I feel is sort of common to all of us is that as we evolve in this life, we eventually find ourselves in an apprenticeship to love. But it's not a love that's always all warm and fuzzy, but it's um, frequently fierce. This kind of love is limitless in its intensity, it's bottomless in its transformative power, and it's endless in its stern requirements. And one requirement that's become really obvious to me, I've discovered, is that I must repeatedly, um, in a, I was going to say stay, but you can't really stay, in a moment to moment recognition that I need to relax into that innocent and permeable beginner's mind that um, makes all things new. That place where I meet each new moment, each new experience with what Terry Patton called the childlike eyes of surprise. And walking through my life with my guard down, I must trust myself, trust in others, trust in life, and ultimately trust in being. And this is without recourse to the known, the familiar, the previous. I must welcome the emergent, the new, the undiscovered, because that's where the grace is waiting. Yeah. Now, there's one other seemingly contradictory dimension to this, which Ram Dass has pointed our attention to. And that's sometimes that grace can be fierce. Sometimes we can be pierced and abraded and even eviscerated by some experience in this life. And yet, in time, we come to see that experience somehow as a hidden blessing. Any of us may have that understanding of a challenging experience in our past.